This is lecture number DR051AA07. It is the 51st lecture of Mega Genius Lectures and the 7th lecture of the Advanced Ability series. It was recorded on September 1st, 2016. The title of this lecture is The Secret of Writing Well. It is 22 minutes long, copyright 2003, 2011, and 2016 by Mega Genius Incorporated, all rights reserved. This lecture is protected by internationally valid copyright. It may not in whole or in part be duplicated, transmitted, or otherwise reproduced without the express permission of Mega Genius Incorporated. Unauthorized translation, importation, or distribution is a violation of applicable laws. Mega Genius is a United States federally registered trademark and service mark. And now, here is Mega Genius.
The ability to communicate is so important that if you can communicate effectively enough, life is as fun as riding on a rainbow. And if you seem to be unable to communicate at all, those who can will authoritatively bury you. Communication may occur in many forms, but often depends upon one's abilities to write and speak. I want to discuss with you in this lecture the ability to write. So let's look at a few of the rules of writing, which you may never have thought about before. The first rule of writing is that you must have something worth communicating. Most writers charge forth fumbling the ball on the 1-yard line. Much of what is written today is neither worth the writing nor the reading, which is one reason that libraries continually sell used books for a pittance. The second rule of writing is that you must convey your thoughts in an interesting manner, since if you fail to capture and hold the reader's attention, he will not read what you write, and therefore no communication will occur. The third rule of writing is that you must transmit your thoughts in an understandable fashion, since if the reader does not understand what you write, nothing will be communicated. Writing is an art and an ability that anyone can improve. Writing well is also an essential component of success. Most literate humans believe that they can write well, but seldom do. In just the next few minutes of this Mega Genius lecture, I will teach you the secret rule of writing well. It is a rule that few people know and that no one applies as well as he should, including me. Knowing the rule will help you to ensure that you are consistently applying the first 3 rules of writing. Using it will save you wasted time and energy and will improve your writing immeasurably. For many years, I've made a hobby of finding unique items that other people thought were of minimal value, but were actually what we might call lost treasures in the attic. Sometimes the worth has been primarily in the story behind the item, and sometimes in the dollar value, but invariably I've enjoyed the discovery. A few months ago in New Orleans, Louisiana, I was in the 33rd Annual French Quarter Festival parade along famous Bourbon Street, just behind the lead steam-puffing horse-drawn calliope and in front of a conglomeration of marching tubas, French horns, bass drums, trombones, trumpets, saxophones, and 4 miniature horses, a 3-month-old donkey, and a llama named Lorenzo. Afterward, a friend and I walked to the French market, where he called my attention to a fellow in one of the booths with 3 yo-yos for sale, whereupon I shouted, "Women and children, save yourselves," as I shoulder-blocked 2 elderly ladies and made a beeline to the toys. 2 of the yo-yos were worth $1 each, although the seller was asking $5 apiece. There was no deal there, but I wanted the 3rd yo-yo, which was a Duncan Original Super Tournament yo-yo in excellent condition, made in the early 1950s, and customarily valued at about $40. The seller only wanted $3 for it. As he was asking less money for the much more valuable yo-yo, I clearly gave him a chance to reconsider by asking him a very in a very questioning voice, so as to suggest that he might want to reconsider. I said, quote, "You will sell me this yo-yo for $3, unquote." And he looked me straight in the eyes and enthusiastically replied, yes. He wanted that $3. Okay, I answered, I will take it. And he traded his yo-yo for my $3. Then I told him, I collect yo-yos professionally. Would you mind if I offered you some advice about them? And he replied eagerly, no, I'd love to learn about them. I marked down the yo-yo that you just bought because it's scratched up. Well, then I told him that yo-yo demonstrators years ago used to sometimes carve children's names and artistic scenes on wooden yo-yos when they were originally sold. And then I held the yo-yo in the right position so that he could see that what he thought were scratches were actually the child's name. A seagull, a palm tree, mountains, and the rising sun, increasing the current value to about $100. The best part of the deal, though, was that he was happy too. He had sold it for more than his cost, and he was wiser and grateful for what he had learned. Getting back to writing, however, at an auction I once found a box of about 25 used books that people had been looking over but disregarding. I bought it for $5 because in it were a first edition of William F. Buffalo Bill Cody's autobiography, Campfire Tales and Fireside Chats, and a first edition of Huckleberry Finn by Samuel Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, and another small, thin, slightly worn, antiquated book which was of far greater value than most people would have suspected. It was another one of the most famous American books ever written, an 1836 first edition of the Eclectic First Reader by William Holmes McGuffey, a professor at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Throughout the following century, 80% of all American school children were educated with more than 122 million copies of the series of small textbooks known as McGuffey's Readers, which had more influence over more children over a longer period than any other book ever written in the United States. The reason America used McGuffey's Readers so extensively and for so long was that they were useful. School systems didn't require extravagant funds to teach generations of children to read quickly and effectively. Instead, inadequately paid school teachers in one-room schoolhouses used the simple McGuffey's Readers to get the job done quickly and effectively. In the 19th century, the children were also competently taught the other two R's, which were called writing and arithmetic. They learned to write legibly and well. And children in the late 1800s learned a kind of arithmetic that most people today have never seen. It was entirely different from the form of arithmetic taught later in the mid-20th century. Yet very young children even learned to solve algebraic problems with it. McGuffey's Readers worked. Now, in the 21st century, only the world's expenditure for defense exceeds that of education. Yet, in our multi-million-dollar public school edifices, with our exhaustively adjudicated curricula, and with our modern electronic instructional gadgetry, and with hair dryers in the boys' locker rooms, we fail to teach children to read as well. Psychologists changed what worked. Flunk. And they also changed arithmetic, again, into the new math, which didn't work nearly as well either. Flunk again. Incidentally, they also drop-kicked geography down the corridor and into the janitor's room. Now many public high school graduates cannot even find the continent of Australia on a world map, although their diplomas certify that they were properly educated, with Americans' tax dollars. Flunk again. Well, no one can write well who cannot read well. Accordingly, as the public's ability to read has deteriorated significantly, so has its ability to write. For example, Florence Filer, the renowned literary agent who represented the book Out of Africa, the motion picture of which won 7 Academy Awards, used to bemoan what she called the national hobby of writing. One afternoon in 1985, she spent hours with me in her Beverly Hills home, sharing her frustration with the poor grammar, punctuation, spelling, and general writing inability displayed in the manuscripts that she received daily from hopeful authors who had never learned the basics of writing. You see, Florence was surrounded that day by stacks of manuscripts submitted by hopeful authors who could write. Yet every one of their 120,000-word manuscripts proved it. Unfortunately, though, not one of them stood a chance in hell of ever getting published. They all wrote, but Florence's objection was, well, that not one of them wrote well. Now, you may never submit a manuscript to a top literary agent, but you may write memorandums or reports or an occasional resume. At least you probably write letters or emails. Almost everyone writes some things, but do you write well? And are you sure? For years, I taught writing techniques and skills for a multi-billion-dollar subsidiary of the media conglomerate Viacom Incorporated, served as editor-in-chief of a financial magazine, and had some 30 million words of my technical writing published. It was probably a record. Incidentally, although I have hired writers by the dozens, I never terminated one. To the degree that you fire employees that you have hired, you have failed to hire the right people. I only fired some writers that others had hired and who had no interest in learning. While interviewing applicants, I learned with a thud that universities nowadays do not teach students how to write. Communications majors don't even know what communication is, literally. Although they have studied all about it in numerous classes, even when pressed, they cannot suggest a definition for the word communication. They receive degrees in the subject, but not an elementary education in it. Trust me, if one doesn't know, at least, that communication is the act of sending something somewhere and accepting responsibility for ensuring that what was intended to be sent is exactly what was received, then he cannot write well. Not only are students today not taught how to write, they are not even taught to write. For example, an author, a close friend of mine who once had so many bestsellers that it set a record unequaled in the publishing industry. He was invited by Harvard University to speak to a class that supposedly was being educated in the subject of writing. And given that it was Harvard, I'm sure that the students were all convinced that they could already write well. Well, when my friend mentioned offhandedly to the students that any professional writer should turn out at least 100,000 to 200,000 words per month, he was surprised to see a wave of confusion course through the class. The student's reaction mystified him until the professor of the class explained later to my friend that he had previously told his students that he only expected each of them to write 1,500 words per semester. Now, this lecture is already close to that. Finally, the Harvard students had at least learned that successful writers write. Now I'll show you how to substantially improve all of your writing with one simple rule that even the best authors fail to apply as well as they should. For now, you can forget about period faults and comma faults, pronoun, antecedents, case, sequence of tenses, and everything else about grammar. Also forget about confusion of clauses, unnecessary commas, and everything else about punctuation. You don't even need to care about non-standard expressions, slang, sentence unity, word order, parallelism, split construction, and dangling modifiers. You can even forget everything you know, or should know, about spelling for now. It's all important, but we're not going there. Instead, just listen as I read a paragraph. Quote, "Any time that you write anything at all, the whole purpose is to communicate some kind of idea or expression from you across a distance to some other person or to some people. In the process of doing that, it is both fundamental and crucial that you ensure that whoever receives the communication that you decide to send properly understands you. Accordingly, the more it is that you write exactly what it is that you are intending to communicate without writing more words than you necessarily have to write, the more easily the person who receives your communication will be understood. Let's say will understand you, and therefore the better your writing will tend to be. All right, now unquote. Now it is a horridly written 110-word paragraph. It fails to do what it is advising you to do. It is replete with excess wordage. Now, let's sharpen our editing pencil and revise it as follows. Quote, any time that you write anything, the purpose is to communicate an idea to some other person. It is imperative that you ensure that whoever receives the communication understands you. Accordingly, the more that you write what you are intending without writing more than you have to, the better your writing will be. Unquote. Now, we have just obliterated more than half the paragraph by eliminating 58 unnecessary words, thereby shortening the paragraph to just 52 words, while maintaining a truthful presentation of the idea. Now, can we improve it further? Well, let's revise it again. Quote, any time you write anything, the purpose is to communicate an idea. In doing so, you must ensure that you are understood. Therefore, the more concisely that you write, the better your writing will be. Unquote. Now, we've shortened the paragraph to a mere 34 words. Can we do even better? Let's revise it again. Quote, the more concise your writing is, the better you will be understood. Unquote. Now we have just distilled the idea to 12 words. Shall we continue what works? Let's revise it again. Quote, to be better understood, write concisely. Unquote. Now we have reduced the paragraph by 95%, from 110 words to only 6, without changing the essence of the communication. Isn't our 6-word version easier to read and understand? Doesn't it communicate more effectively? Isn't that the basic purpose of writing and reading? Now, incidentally, just to amuse myself, after writing the original extra wordy paragraph, I checked it with Microsoft Grammar Checker, strictly applying all the grammar and style rules, which determined that the original extra wordy paragraph was perfectly acceptable. Well, believe me, it would not have been acceptable to Florence Filer, or to Joni Evans, or Loretta Barrett, or to the many other top literary agents and publishing houses that I know. Of the hundreds of manuscripts surrounding Florence and her home that day, you can imagine the percentage of each that was unnecessary fluff. Because of increased publishing costs, publishers today have no use for 120,000-word manuscripts by unproved authors. Instead, they want submissions of about 75,000 words screened by literary agents. The typical manuscript submitted to Florence certainly could have been condensed to merely 25,000 words, easily. Although each hopeful author thought he had written a book, he had actually written only 1/3 of an acceptable size manuscript, inflated with more than a book of unnecessary writing that wasn't worth the adhesive on the postage stamps required to send it. Such a manuscript should never have seen a glimmer of sunlight outside the writer's study. A poor writer will commit 3 primary mistakes. First, he will fail to learn all the basic technology of his profession. Well, I wonder how much basic technology he would be comfortable with his auto mechanic having skipped, or the educator of his child, or his primary physician. A person should always be professional in everything that he does, which includes starting with a sound foundation. Second, a poor writer will then fail to practice his craft as much as he should. A tomato producer grows tomatoes, and a construction worker constructs, and of course a writer writes every day, and he sells what he writes. If he cannot sell it, then that is all the more reason to practice his craft even more. Third, a poor writer or a would-be writer often complains about writer's block, defined as the condition of being unable to think of what to write or how to proceed with writing. Actually, it is usually nothing more than the person overthinking his writing. He does so much thinking and not enough writing. The next thing that he cannot get his story written physically because he has already written it too many times mentally. Prominent among his mistakes, though, he will treat everything he writes as though it is of unquestionable value. If a finished piece does not precisely indicate, or doesn't precisely communicate what he intended, he will add words. Adding words will not improve his writing. Extra words never improve what you write. Rather, they severely weaken the quality of your writing. They diminish the punch and weaken the reader's interest. You may imagine that all your words are carefully crafted jewels and that people scurrying about who slow down to read your literary creations grind to a standstill to admire your every word, but they do not, at least not until you have adequately revised your masterpiece. The finely cut jewels are only the words that remain after you have revised many times. A good writer must be willing to discard any of his second-rate writing that he cannot easily revise to a preeminent standard. For example, some 35 years ago, I wrote a 75,000-word nonfiction manuscript of which I was quite proud. Or that is, until I had finished it and reflected on it, and then realized that it did not adequately communicate what I had intended. So, without ever submitting it to any literary agent, I discarded it without a second thought. Now, that was a lot of excess wordage, and because of it, it was not up to my standards. So, everyone, including myself, is guilty of excess wordage, and we need to continually improve that fault, for it is an affliction that wastes every writer's time and bores his readers. Someday I may write that manuscript again, from scratch, but that's quite all right. After all, writers write. Always remember, though, that good writers don't just write. They rewrite repeatedly. They slash and discard every unnecessary word ruthlessly, and no matter what you write, you should always do the same. There is a name for that skillful form of writing. It is called précis, taken from French, meaning a cut-down statement. The name originated with diplomatic correspondence that needed to be accurate and concise. Nevertheless, you don't need to remember that name, or the numerous frustrations experienced by literary agents daily, or what publishers require, or what students at Harvard are not taught about the real world. I hope, however, that every time you pick up a pen or decide to send even an email, you will keep the following concisely expressed 6-word rule of writing prominently in mind. To write well, cut it out. Just by deciding to do that, and then by applying that rule, you will have greatly increased your ability to communicate in one of the most fundamental ways, and all your writing will be the better for it.